knowledge that the river systems are dynamic and require space within the river corridor for natural processes, including high and low flows, flood attenuation or floodwater storage, and sediment deposition and transport. Today, we'll take a closer look at examples from Washington and Vermont, where those states have developed integrated floodplain management programs to protect and restore rivers and floodplains and adjacent communities. We'll start off with some introductions, and first we'll invite, as I mentioned, all of you to introduce yourself in the chat. And I'll take the opportunity to introduce our speakers. First off will be Kathleen or Kaz Guillauze, who is the Senior Director for Bonneville Environmental Foundation's Watershed Program, and is here today to tell us about Washington's Floodplains by Design program and some of the lessons she and her partners learned along the way. And then we'll hear from Mike Klein. Mike is a river scientist and has worked for the state of Vermont really since 1988, serving in various roles, most recently as the Rivers Program Manager. Mike, quote unquote, retired roughly 5 years ago, but continues to support and advocate for Vermont's floodplains, including most recently supporting some of the recovery efforts from recent flooding. And finally, I'll introduce myself. I'm Brian Murphy. I am the Healthy Rivers Program Director at River Network, and I'm joined today by my colleague, April Engel, who's River Network's Vice President of Rivers Programs. And quickly, in case you're new to River Network, a quick introduction to us. So next slide, April. For over 30 years, River Network has filled a unique niche in the environmental community as the only national nonprofit organization whose sole purpose is to connect and strengthen the national network of water, justice, and river advocates who work for water at the community, local, state, and regional levels. We currently focus in 3 areas: safe, affordable drinking water, healthy, resilient rivers, and climate resilient communities, and support these results through advocacy, organizational development, and science and data. As part of River Network's strategic plan, we identified those 3 focus areas for people and nature that frame our work and represent the future we envision and are helping to create. To learn more, please visit our website and explore our strategic plan that's available on the website. And with that, I'll move into a little bit of an overview of our River Network State Policy Hub. If you're not familiar with it or you're coming back to it, it's an online repository of state policy information on a variety of water policy topics that creates a searchable database of relevant state policies, policy overviews, deep dives, and case studies on how policies were adopted, including state policy approaches to floodplain restoration and protection, one of our newest additions to that. The link, I think April might post it in the chat, is available. And the state policy showcases like today's are a forum for water advocates working to advance state-level water policy, to learn and share state policy successes on a variety of water issues. The showcase features both the nuts and bolts. You'll see lots of nuts and bolts if you navigate to the floodplain restoration and protection page, and how it works, as well as the how-to and what to get the policy and how to go about adopting policy, including strategy, campaigns, conditions. And I think Kaz and Mike will certainly touch on some of those pieces in their presentation today. So with that, today's agenda, we'd like to hear from you. So please let us know in the chat, why is floodplain restoration protection needed, how it may relate to hazard mitigation in your community, or watershed, why that's an important piece. And then what do you hope to learn during today's showcase? And April and I will review some of those and try and is our best, partly during the latter part of today's showcase, where we have some time to go through some of those. And then while you answer those questions, a quick overview of our call today. We'll hear from Kaz first, as I mentioned, about Washington's Floodplains by Design program. And then we'll turn it over to Mike, and he'll talk to us about Vermont's Functioning Floodplains Initiative and some of the lessons that he and his team have learned. We'll have plenty of time for you to ask Kaz and Mike questions. Please note your questions down or put them in a chat, and we'll facilitate the Q&A since we're lucky to have both of them here today. We really hope you'll stick around until the end because we'll have some simple networking exercises that can help you all know who's in attendance today and how you might connect peer-to-peer following today's call. And we hope to cram that all in over the next 52 minutes because we will wrap up at 3 Eastern, noon Pacific. And just excited to have you all here, and I'll kick it over to Kaz to start us off.
Thank you so much. While the slides are coming up, it's an honor to be here. Thank you, Brian and River Network, for the invitation. It's a real honor to share a stage with Mike Klein, and really looking forward to the conversation today. I'm delighted to be here today sharing a little bit with you about a program in Washington State called Floodplains by Design. Next slide. I'm just one person in a partnership of many who are working to give this program shape. It's been in existence since 2013, and I'll share a little bit more about some of the overarching principles and how that program operates. I'll try to touch on 3 policy examples, and we'll make that hazard mitigation nexus. As we dive in, I want to draw on some emergency management training and acknowledge this space we're in right now today that's fairly unique in time. In Washington State, emails are flying about what's happening with our federal funding, what's happening with our public works projects, what can we count on, what's in limbo. This is just creating a lot of stress and strain in our system. And so that if we think of our brains, and this is that little mnemonic from an emergency management training, when we've got this kind of cortisol in our systems and this stress and strain, our frontal lobe kind of goes offline. We go into that fight or flight zone. That frontal lobe is what we need for good policy and good collaborative planning. It's where decision-making is held, creative thinking, relationship building, sequential thinking. And I just want to make sure that we're acknowledging the reality of the pressure that's upon us in a bipartisan nature with throughout the state, whether you're in public works, tribal government, an NGO. Now is a time we need each other. And so I've kind of intentionally focused this presentation to really hone in on people. Relationships is a space where we all can maintain an autonomous sphere of influence. And it felt like a timely focus for today. Next slide. So what is Floodplains by Design? As I mentioned, it's a program in Washington State that has existed for over a decade. It includes large capital grant projects. These have been funded to date in at least 19 counties. Some of the outcomes through the last biennium are shown on the right. Many of the projects are advanced by collaboratives in places. One thing that's unique about Floodplains by Design funding is that it actually provides money for, I'm seeing some chat about slides, and I'll just keep talking and hope that those can be visible if they're not. There is funding actually in the awards for collaboration. This is unique. We find it's an essential ingredient in helping complex projects in floodplains gain traction and enable that complexity to be competitive for funding and move forward within their communities. Next slide, please. One thing that is quite unique about the Floodplains by Design program is that it is a designated public-private partnership. So there's a capital grant program. This averages between around $50 to $60 million a biennium in grants. Those grants are capped at $10 million each, but the projects themselves often cost tens of millions of dollars, occur through phases, and leverage significant other local, state, and federal monies. The Department of Ecology administers this grant program. And then my organization, Bonneville Environmental Foundation, along with a team of many others, is a supportive actor to the administration of the program. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of tribal leaders, tribal staff, commissions, local governments, NGOs, and more who are holding the vision for communities on the ground, engaging in the long-term planning and the execution of complex project planning and implementation. But this slide gives you a little bit of a sense of some of the complementary roles that makes FBD a unique program with the state agency and then a partner NGO, which can hold different space, enable different kinds of conversations. Each organization, when you're advancing these complex floodplain projects, has its own authorities. We acknowledge people don't leave those authorities at the table. It can sometimes be easier if different actors ask certain kinds of questions, poke behind the scenes, nudge funding, nudge policy, et cetera. And so just calling out the unique nature of this public-private partnership and what it can unleash in terms of conversation, relationship building, and capacity. Next slide. The NGO team really focuses on three overarching things, and in a nutshell, I'll just call it simplification. So we know that as complex programs live and exist in the world, they tend to get more onerous, burdensome, administratively complicated. So the NGO team takes a concerted effort at trying to push back on that complexity, find different pathways to simplify policy and implementation where possible, to be striving to increase the diversity of funding available on the table, and to hold that pragmatic voice as well about the complexity of holding and managing many grants and other revenue sources in order to get these projects moving. And then looking at capacity and policy, really. Where can local capacity be supported, better understood, better socialized to help move forward good policy that can improve system function? Next slide. As we've thought about this on our team, we've come to think of key humans in the world who play very critical roles in the advancement of excellent policy. I'm going to dive into a couple of these through a set of examples, but I want to call out too, it's easy to take for granted what is policy. These two definitions that I've put up here kind of shine a light on the irony of policy. So in one frame, we think of it as being a pretty human set of ideas and plans that drives decision making. And then we can also come to think of it as a very rational set of deliberative systems that makes a lot of sense. If you've been in the world of integrated floodplain management and floodplain policy, you know many policies are absolutely not rational, that systems can grow and become layered in complexity that no longer makes sense. And so this is a human landscape. We have a lot of autonomy and authority, and we want to look to certain kinds of people that we can identify and support so that we can be advancing policies that make sense for our communities. Next slide. So the first example I wanted to share relates to grant implementation and troubleshooting. These projects, as I mentioned, take many tens of millions of dollars to make happen, from community planning to technical assistance, permitting, implementation, post-project stewardship. There's a role that we've come to call being a familiar outsider, where as an NGO partnership, we can hold conversations with grant recipients and grantors in ways that can really support mutual understanding and better policy. To give you a sense, the guidebook that drives the integrated floodplain management grant program in Washington State alone is 155 pages. Many of these projects are also beholden to very specific local jurisdiction and tribal administrative policies, to specific policies around practices such as buyouts, acquisitions, elevations. These are extremely complicated programs to administer, and tensions will continue to boil up. What can be positive about having a third party in the room, a familiar outsider, as we call it, is the ability to help people see what's behind the curtain, understand each other's constraints, move forward to build more constructive relationships and communications. Next slide. A second example of a policy reform that's occurred through floodplains by design is removal of grant match requirements. This required roles that existed throughout the system in the local collaboratives that we call the integrator. So those humans who exist throughout our system who can see connections, bridge divides, build strong partnerships to get important changes happening. We were hearing from some grantees that they were spending hundreds of hours a year administering simple invoicing and quarterly payment requests and reports. A single quarterly report in some cases could add up to be over 150 pages. There was administrative burden on both the side of the grant recipient as well as the administrators. Through a lot of work of locals documenting the lift, investigation into the actual state policy governing grant match requirements, we learned that this was actually not necessary. So through finding these integrators throughout the system at the local level, at the agency level, and then going up through the AG offices, we were able to successfully remove the grant match requirement for the Floodplains by Design program, which was a pretty significant and important hurdle to overcome. Next slide. And then policy example number 3, and I'm not going to go in great detail on the technical background of this. I think many of you will recognize this acronym. It's the conditional letter of map revision, and then a letter of map revision. These are permitting steps required for projects that are occurring in floodways that exceed a certain rise extent and require remapping. The permitting system and its complexity has become a focus of our NGO Backbone's work after having just countless conversations with local project implementers about the cost, time constraints, and administrative burden this is creating. What we have found has been critical to successful policy generation. We're not done here yet. This is an ongoing body of work, but is that T-shaped individuals. People cannot create complex policy in a bubble. Small groups, when you're dealing with integrated, I'll come back to some of those questions, sorry. With those complex integrated projects, you really need to have NFIP experts at the table, local jurisdictions with a deep understanding of what it means to be implementing these projects in their communities. You need FEMA folks, you need state agency folks. So it's an effort and an important focus to identify and bring in to that policy process these T-shaped individuals who have the deep expertise needed to craft excellent policy, but who also can think expansively, think creatively, think with an integrated mind. Next slide. And so through all this here, I'm coming back to kind of underline that human landscape. I didn't touch on these other 2 types of people, but honestly, these are kind of core to all the work we do together with our agency and local partners, seeking meaningful and supportive policies. This is the work of strategic opportunists, and this is the work of visionaries. And these are people who exist within every single collaborative, in every community, and at every scale of government. And so the good news is we can find those people and bring them in to the policy crafting endeavor. Next slide. Go and back way up. And so this, unfortunately, though, takes time. And it takes a lot of boring staff work. And that staff work involves documenting conversations, rolling up decisions, triangulating, and triangulating, speaking to your local floodplain managers, speaking to your project implementers, your federal, state, local policy implementers. Unfortunately, we often don't take the time it needs to come to those policies that can really have the most impact because we're moving under systems of pressure as well. So we can't let perfect be the enemy of good, but being cognizant that this good work does not happen on its own. It takes humans doing that hard work that is often very not glamorous, but that does build trust and build understanding and build towards better integrated policy. Next slide. And so shifting a little bit to hazard mitigation, um, all of these floodplains by design projects in one way or another are hazard mitigation projects. And we also think of hazard mitigation as a planning process itself that can lead to the unleashing of additional types of funding. And so we've got an incredible T-shaped thinker here who's also really a visionary and kind of all the things. Joel Freudenthal, a recently retired floodplain manager in Yakima County. He came to our Floodplains by Design network to share some reflections on really strategic planning relating to hazard mitigation to start seeing crisis as opportunity. And in that same brain model, we know we really can't do the good thinking we need with our frontal lobes when we're in the crisis point. That's what planning is really for. Joel was really urging the group to learn from some of the lessons of Yakima County, where it's not only the floodplain managers who need to be involved in the crafting of comprehensive flood hazard management plans, it's your entire community of integrated floodplain practitioners. And when you can get those projects that are advancing habitat recovery, supporting the agricultural system, advancing infrastructure and smart development, you can put those projects in your hazard mitigation plans, making them eligible in some cases for federal disaster response and recovery funding to get your community moving in the trajectory that it is envisioning, so that you are not acting in the spur of the moment to shore up a bridge or other infrastructure at risk. You're using that disaster declaration, those Stafford Act mitigation monies and others to get the integrated projects your community has already thought through on the table, and often without some of the burdensome permitting that is required when you're doing it as pre-disaster mitigation. Next slide. And there really isn't time to go into adequate depth on all of this, but just to share that the silos that we use in talking about this work, flood risk, fish recovery, farm development, are really just that. They are silos, and they artificially create a way of thinking about the world that does not always make sense and that does not always drive the best solutions. And so in this same conversation, we heard from a tribal panel. We heard their frustrations at how certain kinds of infrastructure are cataloged in order to enable recovery funds to be unleashed, that this does not always align with tribal values, with the ecosystem services that are most critical, and where folks in many tribal communities would categorize hazards entirely differently. So we have much good work to do to improve these systems. We do have some very innovative hazard mitigation plans coming online that we are trying to track and keep an eye on. Very curious if any of you have some of those to share. One in particular that we can put a link to in chat is the Fort Peck Assiniboine Tribal Hazard Mitigation Plan that really masterfully integrates tribal values, tribal habitats, conservation of key species, along with flood risk reduction and infrastructure protection activities. So part of our work too is trying to seek those visionary folks outside of Washington State who are advancing work that we can learn from. With that, next slide, I will turn it over and back to Mike. Again, very grateful for your time, and I'll try to track some of the questions and answer them in chat.
Thank you so much, Kaz. That was wonderful. And you're not off the hook yet. We're going to give folks a few minutes to ask some direct questions to you before we turn it over to Mike. And there are a few in the chat, but I did want to say if there's anyone that has a burning question and wants to come off mute and ask it directly, feel free to do that now. And so just April, with your help, scanning to see if anybody has a question to come off mute.
There is a question in the chat, Brian, that we could go with. Yeah.
Let's do that one. It says, this is from Will Price. Can you talk more about replacing match requirement with leverage, and what does this mean? What benefits and downsides?
Yes. So in the last few years of federal infrastructure investments, I think match has kind of taken more of a spotlight. There have been a number of federal programs where match has been waived. and there's essentially a recognition that there isn't maybe the need we once thought. The phrase that we would raise in our conversations would be, this notion of skin in the game. That certain funds and funders are eager to see what match monies one can bring to the table because that demonstrates more support for the project. We know these communities have skin in the game. This is their infrastructure, critical species, their future growth trajectories on the line. They're already investing their own match. These projects cannot move forward with single grants. And it was becoming increasingly clear that this was kind of a dated framing. We looked into the rules and regulations and learned that this was not codified. It was not a true requirement, but there was a sense of we're doing our job as the state if we have this as a step. So there really are no downsides that we can see. It took a lot, and it took a lot of moving through the complex internal systems of a large state agency. But leverage is an easier way to document monies that are complementing project activities that don't have the same hurdles to applicants and the same administrative requirements.
Great. Thank you for expanding on that. We did have one other question that we'll direct now and then move on to Mike. It says, could you expand a little on trajectories? Maybe give an example. How are they defined? And is it about imagining a different trajectory / outcome that everyone buys into?
Yeah, can you spark my thinking again more on that, Brian? The trajectory part?
I think it's a little bit about, what the river looks like now and what the trajectory might be, or how some of the partners
Okay.
envision what
Yeah, okay.
what the river
Thank
could look
you.
like. Yeah.
So there are dozens of examples of what this is looking like in different parts of Washington state. And as you all know, if you're working in the floodplain world, these are often highly occupied, contentious, high value locations. You have agriculture, you've got infrastructure, many cities are located in floodplain areas. You have pushes towards affordable housing and development, growth management standards that often push people into floodplains unintentionally. In many cases where you have low elevation topography, you have entire communities that can be located largely in floodplains. And so these solutions can't be forced from the top down. You need community buy-in. And often we're facing really challenging decisions where it requires people getting together, looking at different information sources, building relationships so that they can begin to trust each other and grapple with what are often not win-win outcomes. And so that's really what we mean by trajectories. Sometimes you are putting on the table a solution that is a $500 million solution for a very small community, and it can feel ridiculous. But those projects can come to be, and communities need to have that space to vision the possibility, also grapple with the real threats that we know already exist and are coming with new precipitation, weather patterns, flood trajectories, etc. So I don't mean to overuse that word trajectory, but I think I'm leaning into that critical importance of time and space for communities to gather, discuss, and build trusting relationships.
That's great. Thank you, Kaz. And my bandwidth is low, is getting the notice I'm getting, so hopefully you can still see me. But I think at this point we'll move on to Mike, and then we'll have some time for Q&A and a broader discussion after he wraps up. So thank you so much, Kaz, and Mike, take it away.
Thank you, River Network, for having me as a part of this showcase. And Kaz, I really appreciated your presentation. So much of what you described, it has been our experience here in Vermont in developing our program as well. Your focus on the people piece of it is so critical. I'm going to probably delve a little bit more into the science and talk about how the science drove our program. You can go to the next slide, April. Our let's see here, coming up. I'm not seeing it. Not there. I guess right now I'm seeing Brian, but I'm not seeing my slides. I will just go, start by saying that there we go. Thank you. Our program is functioning floodplain initiative is about education. It's about technical assistance. It's about funding assistance, and it's also a regulatory. It's become a regulatory program. The main drivers of Vermont's floodplain program have been our recognition that our streams and our floodplains are not connected, and our floods are essentially fire hoses that are taking out much of our habitat structure of our streams. And so many constituencies and programs have come together to start looking at process-based restoration of our habitats. It's also been very largely driven by the lack of floodplain function in storing sediment and nutrient that's going into our impaired lakes, and the role of channel incision and the lack of floodplain function that is causing that impairment. And the biggest driver, of course, is the predominance of fluvial erosion in our narrow river valleys in Vermont. The damage that I'm showing here with this house is becoming more and more common in Vermont. And so understanding that process and developing programs to address it has been key. When we started out looking at this accelerated erosion, we were trying to treat erosion at sites. And many of our projects were failed. They just did not work. And we had to step back and realize that we needed to look at a larger scale. We formed a rivers program in about the year 2000 and began assessing and managing erosion at watershed scales. Next slide. We began this process by putting together a three-phase stream geomorphic assessment protocol consisting of map surveys and varying degrees of complex field assessments where we could understand the geomorphic condition of our streams. Next slide. What we really found after assessing thousands of miles of streams throughout Vermont was that most of our streams and rivers were in this channel downcutting, widening, and depositional process. They were evolving to more stable and floodplain forms that in response to decades, if not centuries, of channelization to accommodate development, transportation networks, and farming practices within our narrow valleys. 75% of our streams were in these downcut stages of the channel evolution. And every time we got a flood, our streams would begin to evolve into these more stable floodplain connected forms. The tradition in Vermont was to go in and redredge the channels, reberm the channels, and try to contain those floods within the channel. That would only set us up for a more catastrophic set of erosion events in the next flood. So the next slide. So this data was extremely helpful for Vermont to go into the legislature and work within agencies across Vermont government to explain that our flood damages were associated with erosion. 75% of our damages were erosion and not inundation. Oh, nearly as high percentage of our damages were outside of these FEMA maps. The special flood hazard area was the signal to Vermont communities of when it was safe to build next to a river. With our rivers deeply incised and entrenched from channelization, the 100-year flood in many cases was within the channel itself. So, the edges of that special flood hazard area show that you could build almost right up to a Vermont stream and not be in the floodplain, not be required to buy flood insurance to get your mortgage. And so we were sending the wrong signal to Vermont communities about the role of our floodplains and where they're located. So this picture of Mendon Brook, it sat encroached upon by Route 4 in Vermont for decades until Tropical Storm Irene came along and it rebuilt its floodplain in one storm. These are the kinds of adjustments we're seeing in our streams. Next slide, please. So we took this, this information and we explained that to limit the damage to existing infrastructure and property, it's going to be dependent on our ability to protect these natural restorative processes that are working at watershed scales. Instead of pushing this evolution back up to the early incised, we had to try where we could to let it proceed and develop floodplains. This was a big break from where we started. We started with the notion that we could restore our floodplains. And it was going to be through our work, funding restoration projects to get these important values back, our water quality, our flood resilience, et cetera. And it was really the realization that the river's doing the work and that our programs had to focus on protection and then layer on top of that restoration practices that worked in concert with that evolutionary process. And that erosion-related damages we're driving these policies to require limits on new river encroachments in Vermont, and that those actions on the part of municipalities to really limit the encroachments on our rivers became an incentive and sometimes even a prerequisite for some of our funding. In other words, you were going to go to the front of the list for hazard mitigation money if you were doing a practice, but not at the same time allowing yet more and more encroachments within your stream and river corridors of your municipality. And this incentive created a lot of awareness in Vermont about the value of giving room for the river. We developed the Vermont River Corridor to define that minimal space that the river needs to come and to work towards equilibrium process to reform a floodplain and become vertically stable. Next slide, please. Again, it was the science and the involvement of groups and agencies across all sectors, recognizing the lack of floodplain function as the driver to these societal issues that drove a series of legislation that became law in Vermont. Mainly after major flood events, that's when everybody's attention was on these issues. Before 2010, the state had very little regulatory authority over in-stream alterations. And Act 110 and Act 138 gave jurisdiction to DEC to regulate all in-stream activities in perennial streams and to regulate emergency protective measures. Those measures that occur immediately after a flood where a municipality and landowners are getting into the stream to put it back the way it was, those now require a permit. And unless it's directly involved with protecting imminent threat to public safety, we're working with our partners to let those streams evolve. And there's also been a progression of regulation in Vermont to limit encroachments within river corridors as well. It started out incentivizing municipalities, as I discussed before, to adopt bylaws to limit river corridor encroachments. But after 10 years, it was recognized that our small Vermont communities did not have the capacity to implement, quite a technical regulation in terms of land use. So this past year, after devastating floods in both 2023 and 24, the legislature passed Act 121, the Vermont Flood Safety Act, which has directed DEC to develop regulations for all development within the mapped river corridors. So 5,400 miles of river corridor, floodplain, and riparian vegetation will be protected when these rules take place. So I'm focused a lot on how the science evolved into regulatory programs in the state of Vermont, but I want to also emphasize that the science, it developed very extensive technical assistance programs, education programs, and working with partners to pursue projects and funding to do this work as well. So it's not just resting on the regulatory arena. Next slide, please.
And Mike just wanted to give you about 5 minutes left for your presentation.
Thank you very much. This slide really I wanted to just touch on. We developed a set of performance standards in Vermont where in-stream activities could not perpetuate an unnatural aggrading or degrading of the stream. A dredging or berming activity that's going to cause incision would not be permitted at this point in our river corridors. There can be certain infill, but essentially our river corridors have become no-build zones in such that they would cause a stream to depart from or further depart from its natural processes. So these fundamental performance standards are the basis of both the technical and regulatory assistance programs in the state. Next slide, please. The other big driver of our programs has been our water quality obligations towards the Clean Water Act, which says that we should be maintaining and restoring the physical integrity of our waters, and yet the act pretty much focuses on the discharge of pollutants and is very quiet on many of these other physical processes that are central to the physical integrity. So when the first TMDL for Lake Champlain came out, it recognized municipal treatment plants and indirect discharges, overland runoff, discharge of pollutants, sediment, and nutrient from forest, developed land, and agriculture. But it was silent on the loading from the lack of floodplain storage and the instability caused by disequilibrium. So we put our data on the table, and EPA adopted a TMDL, first in the nation, that really recognized channel evolution and the lack of floodplain function as a part of the load equation. And now a whole stream of funding programs and technical assistance programs have shifted towards looking at the restoration of floodplain function as a way that Vermont's going to meet its TMDL obligations. So next slide, please. So, these I'm just giving a couple examples of how the science, brought us to major policy and program changes in Vermont. Much of this has involved hundreds of different partners that were all trying to get to sing out of the same hymnal, so to speak. But things were scattered in Vermont. We had data over here. We had separate river corridor plans scattered all over the place. And the TMDL really sort of pushed us to say, we need a tracking system. We need to a way to show Vermonters we're making progress, that these one-off projects in combination with the regulatory, with the technical assistance is getting us to a better place in terms of floodplain function. So we're in the process of developing this web app where all of our data will live. It's interactive. People can explore the data and do project planning. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip right over this maze, but it essentially shows how we're feeding data into these reaches and coming up with ways to prioritize projects that then feeds into all these various planning programs over here in the green at different agencies that rely on information to carry out their own programs, whether it be emergency management, transportation agencies, or community development agencies. Next slide, please. We're applying these connectivity and fluvial process departure scores to river and river corridor subunits in the watershed to create opportunities to allocate TMDL pollutant loads and prioritize projects with greater connectivity gains, to quantify flood and erosion damage reduction and habitat co-benefits for reconnection projects, to reevaluate connectivity and ecosystem function after project implementation and update connectivity scores, and then finally be able to track our gains in connectivity and function as we go forward. And again, tying our technical assistance and funding programs to people, using this tool is helping us get a convergence of a focus on what we mean by connected systems. Next slide, please. This slide just shows what the web app looks like, where you can click on an individual stream reach and look at the longitudinal connectivity scores, things that are affecting the magnitude and timing of flows. You can click on the river corridor and see how connected the floodplain is, both vertically and laterally. What are the types of projects that are prioritized within that subunit to achieve function and look at co-benefits. Next slide. Or you can go into the planning modules of the web app and actually drill down. Say you're a watershed organization that just wants to plant buffers. You can go to your watershed, you can click on riparian buffer priorities, and it'll show all those reaches in your watershed where we've identified high priority riparian planting as an important component of lateral connectivity. I've highlighted in the orange color the river corridor, wetland, and floodplain protection. We were able to get the nod from EPA to actually give load reduction credits in the TMDL for protection. So if we do a river corridor easement where we're purchasing the channel management rights within a river corridor, we get a load reduction. We get a co-benefit of hazard mitigation and habitat score for that protection project. And of course, the stream connectivity, the dam removals, culvert replacements, that sort of thing are all within the app. Next slide. So, that's really, again, our story of how, after sort of focusing our efforts at site scale through individual projects, building the science around watershed connectivity, and developing a community of practice through education, funding, technical assistance, and regulation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. Uh, we knew bringing you and Kaz together would be a wealth of information, and we wouldn't be able to get to through all of it in such a short amount of time. But great information on Vermont, and there's a few questions. We'll just kind of use the rest of the time, Mike, to pass along a few of those questions, and then I think we might be able to follow up with responses after the fact on some of the other ones we don't get to. The first one I just call out is from Steve. He's asking, how was this done? In other words, thinking about Iowa, what was the driver, and kind of I think you touched on some of the state aspects of it, but maybe just kind of the impetus for the program, if I'm understanding his question
Yeah,
correctly.
well, the main impetus was, really addressing the increasing amount of erosion-related damage that we were seeing in Vermont. That was the primary driver. The legislature asked, well, if all of our communities are enrolled in the National Flood Insurance Program, why are we seeing all this damage? And so, we had to introduce the idea of fluvial erosion and why it was happening, and do the homework behind showing that. And then, of course, it evolved into the whole water quality arena and habitat arena as well. But it was really the driver was erosion related damage that was not being addressed by the flood hazard programs that existed at the time.
Okay. Yeah. Oftentimes the river tells us where we need to be focusing and tell that story. So that's great. One other question. Nice to see you, Jen Shanahan. She's asking about, sounds like a lot of these acts regulate future development, and do they support or regulate homeowners currently in high-risk areas? Or and there's another question, how is the state kind of tackling the areas that are already developed and already have
Yeah.
erosion happening?
No, great question. So as I was wrapping up there and talking about that web app that we're developing, so much of what that's being used for is to identify how do we address erosion hazard and how do we address floodplain dysfunction around the built environment that exists. And so, for instance, in a number of our more urban areas of the state, we're identifying high priority floodplain restorations within the city boundaries that are lowering flood elevations, that are absorbing and attenuating flood energy within those communities. So we're not trying to fix rivers anymore as much as provide these floodplains that whereas the river can begin to function and make it safer for people downstream. So yes, projects to address the existing infrastructure and the people that are there is critical to not only the river but the people that live there and their interest in working with the program.
All right, one last quick question, then April has some wrap-up stuff. There's just a question, it's great that the legislature was supportive of this. Was there any pushback or hesitancy from other agencies or from state agencies already tasked with administering regulation, and then some adding, another program and more regulations on their plates?
Yes, there was, pushback initially, but there's a story behind the work we did, and Kaz kind of touched on this, the years it takes to sit with your different partners in all those different silos and show how floodplain function is in the interest of their constituency. And so integrating these geomorphic principles into NRCS programs, integrating the science into transportation infrastructure. Why is it important to, put in a road embankment next to a stream vertically to preserve floodplain and reconnection than to just dump rock over the side of the roadway as past practice is, eliminating the cross section of the stream. All of these agencies took hand-holding to show them the science, show them how, this was really going to work for them.
Yeah. Excellent. Again, really appreciate Kaz, Mike, great information, and we could carry on, but we need to wrap up here, and we'll try and respond to some of these questions via River Network's website or sending them out to the participants. So with that, I'll turn it over to April, and again, thank you so much for attending today.
Yeah, again, thank you so much, Mike and Kaz, not only for being here and preparing these presentations and sharing your expertise and experience with all of us today, but also for working with us to develop this new category in the State Policy Hub. So just a reminder to everybody that there are lessons from Mike and Kaz and their teams in the State Policy Hub. And that is a place where you can learn a lot more about this as well. Really quickly, just for those of you who may not already be connected to River Network, we invite you and encourage you to join this network. There's thousands of us who are working for healthy waters and communities that are connected through River Network. We have free membership and we also have paid membership. And you can see there is a link there, but you can also just go to rivernetwork.org to just learn more about how to get plugged in with us at River Network. We'd love to have you join us. And then finally, I have a really big ask for all of you. I'm going to put a link in the chat. Your feedback on today's State Policy Showcase is so valuable to us. I can't overemphasize that enough. We really take your feedback seriously to help us design these learning experiences to meet your needs. So please just take a few minutes, click on that link and give us feedback so that we can continue to learn how we can make these as beneficial as possible for all of you. And again, thank you all for attending today. It was wonderful to see such a big crowd that was here today to learn about floodplain restoration and protection. And let's stay connected. We recorded today's session. We'll follow up and send you a link to the recording, and let us know how you want to stay connected about this topic in the future. We're happy to respond to your needs. And again, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Cass. Thank you, Brian. So appreciative of all of you, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Thanks again.